Hello, wrestling fans. This is Mark Radulich, the host here at the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. And tonight is a TV Party Tonight Extra remembering King Kong Bundy. King Kong Bundy passed away today at the age of 61. He was born November 7th, 1957 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I knew him best as part of the Heenan family, the stable of villain wrestlers that Hulk Hogan ran through in the early rock and wrestling WWF boom of the mid '80s. He was, of course, Hulk Hogan's main event opponent at WrestleMania 2 in the Big Blue Cage. But we're going to talk about all of his career as a wrestler. He was one of my favorite villains, and we'll do as we've done with unfortunately some other wrestlers in the past few years. We're going to talk about them tonight, remember them fondly, and put them to bed, as it were. Joining me tonight, my partner in crime, keeping me on the straight and narrow, Mr. Toxic Masculinity himself, Mr. Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
I want a 5 count, Mark.
5 count?
If King Kong Bundy gets a 5 count, I want a 5 count tonight.
You're referencing one of his, one of his gimmicks, which I do not remember.
Mark, we're talking about King Kong Bundy, who was not satisfied with pinning his opponent for a 3 count. He wanted a 5 count.
That's right. I do remember that now. Gosh, it's been so long, Pat.
You know what I always wondered?
What did you always wonder?
So, whenever he would demand a 5 count, like he'd always get it, what happens if he would have demanded a 5 count, got a 3 count, got to 4, and the person kicked out? Would it still count as a win?
You know, I think asking for the 5 count brings about a lot of complications that they didn't think about when they thought, well, this is a great idea for a gimmick. Luckily, I don't think that ever happened. So,
no, we never had to cross that bridge.
No. So as I said, and as I've said in many of these shows that we've done, my wrestling begins and ends with the WWF in the mid '80s. Were you aware of King Kong Bundy prior to his entry into the World Wrestling Federation in 1985?
No, mostly because I wasn't alive. But my intro to King Kong Bundy was his WWF run, his first WWF run. In that glory era of Hulkamania. I didn't get to learn about him prior to WWE till years later.
According to his wiki, he competed in various territories like the AWA, Vern Gagne's Minnesota territory, the National Wrestling Alliance. He also wrestled for Bill Watts' Mid-South. And I know you like to watch your Mid-South. How much Bundy have you seen? How much Bundy footage have you seen in Mid-South?
Really not very much because his stay there was pretty short. I remember seeing him work against the Junkyard Dog and maybe a squash match or two, but as far as high-profile stuff, the only match I remember seeing him in was against the Dog at the Irish McNeil Boys Club for a TV taping.
So, what are some of your... I know the two biggest memories I have of King Kong Bundy were obviously his WrestleMania 2 main event against Hulk Hogan in the Big Blue Cage. But I also remember, I believe it's WrestleMania 3, where he was part of the 6-man against Hillbilly Jim with a pair of midgets. And he did the avalanche there on...
Little Beaver,
yeah, I'm reading it now. I'm reminded of it. Yeah, what a heelish thing he had done when he splashed a fucking midget. Tell me about some of your earliest memories of King Kong Bundy. Like, first time you see this guy on TV. What are some of your thoughts?
It always stuck out to me because it was such a weird nickname. But I remember Gorilla Monsoon when he came out, with Bobby Heenan. Gorilla Monsoon calling him the walking condominium. And I was like, I don't know what the hell that is, but it sounds right. And then, of course, I found out what a condominium was, and I was like, you know what? It is right. It was just one of those weird, off-the-wall nicknames that they would give these guys, but it made perfect sense because Bundy, he was a giant in the sense that he was a huge amount of body mass. He was 400-plus pounds. He was billed as 6'4", but he was really probably about 6'2", maybe 6'3". So he was a wide load, and he had big proportions in a lot of his areas, too. So he really was a walking condominium. And the first Bundy match I remember seeing, a lot of was, besides the Hogan cage match, I used to, for whatever reason, rent the first WrestleMania a lot when it was on VHS. And, your parents wanted to keep you entertained for 2 hours. Here, rent a videotape. No matter what video store you were in, generally anyone would have had the first WrestleMania. So I remember what was called 8 seconds. It was really about 24, 25 seconds, where he squashed one of the great jobbers of all time, S.D. Jones.
Yes, I actually remember that. I think that had the quickest victory in the history of wrestling up to that point.
That's what they did. But that just shows you that they were committed to, at the time, really building Bundy into a top threatening, level heel, because they wanted to show him as this destructive force that could run right through somebody in a matter of seconds. And SD wasn't a guy who got squashed in matches. He would give, whoever was going to beat him a run for their money, and then finally, pull defeat from the jaws of victory. But Bundy just gave him nothing, just ran right through him. Avalanche, big splash, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I remember that as a kid. Even as a kid, and I knew nothing about S.D. Jones, but I laughed my ass off. It was like, wow, where'd they pick up this homeless guy? Like I said, so going through his wiki here, in 1982, King Kong Bundy relocated to Texas, where he joined World Class Wrestling Association. Bundy was developed by the Von Erich family as Big Daddy Bundy.
That was a funny gimmick.
So let's talk about it. What was so funny? What was so interesting about the Big Daddy Bundy?
So, because I was used to seeing the Bundy that I think most of us know of, with the bald head and the black singlet and just mean and nasty, Big Daddy Bundy was like a very simple country boy that is based off of the character in England, Big Daddy, who's Shirley Crabtree.
Something like a Uncle Elmer type of gimmick?
Yeah, like a simpleton from the farm who he tied a rope around his pants and he had a full head of hair, which was very shocking to me when you see it for the first time. And he was this big, lovable, good guy who, the Von Erichs were trying to bring along. It's essentially, in a lot of ways, the same angle that WWE ran with Hulk Hogan and Hillbilly Jim, except they never turned Jim into a nasty bad guy who turned on the Hulk.
Yep, it says Bundy was recruited by Playboy Gary Hart and dramatically reintroduced as King Kong Bundy. This time wearing the black singlet, etc., etc. He lost his hair during the feud, which added to his signature look. He retired Fritz Von Erich, at least that's what it says here, in 1982 at Texas Stadium.
Well, he was the retirement match. One of the cooler visuals you'll ever see is they had the match at Texas Stadium. It was, the Parade of Champions, and Fritz actually pins him in the end zone of Texas Stadium on the star of the Cowboys logo.
Wow. So
if you're a Dallas person, or and you grew up loving all things good about Dallas, the Von Erichs and Cowboys and the Texas Rangers, that's about everything you'd ever want right there.
So he starts his career in 81, and by 85 he's in the WWF. And I would say this is where he spends the bulk of his career. He's got a first run of 3 years, from 85 to 88. He goes into semi-retirement between 88 and 94. And then there's the dark times. the early to mid-90s. The sort of the shit era of the WWF, where he's part of the $1 Million Corporation. We'll get to that in a little bit, and his unfortunate match with The Undertaker being sort of the highlight is in quotes. But let's talk about let's talk about the heyday here. We talked about WrestleMania 1, where he squashed the hell out of S.D. Jones. So in '85, Jimmy Hart traded Bundy to Bobby Heenan in exchange for Adrian Adonis and the Missing Link. It's a hell of a trade. Do you remember the Missing Link, by the way?
Yeah, was never a fan.
I always enjoyed colorful characters, but I was always wondering, what post-apocalyptic toxic waste dump did they pull the Missing Link out of? After joining the Heenan family, Bundy feuded extensively with Andre the Giant, and started with a feud which started during an angle where Bundy interfered in one of Andre's matches. Now, have you seen any of these barn burners between Andre the Giant and King Kong Bundy?
In fact, I have, Mark. And as you're an avid listener to the Something to Wrestle With Bruce Pritchard podcast, do you recall one of the names they always make fun of that WrestleMania was always billed as?
Oh, gosh. I know what you're referencing, but I can't remember the name that they came up with.
So, one of the names that Conrad always makes sure to make fun of is the Colossal Jostle.
Yes.
They actually did get to use that name, believe it or not, for an MSG card, and I believe it was May or June of '85, where the main event was the Colossal Jostle of Andre the Giant versus King Kong Bundy.
Wow.
And now, Gorilla Monsoon and used to always like to use a phrase, the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. That's not always the most exciting visual. When the guy doing most of the bumping and selling is Bundy, it's kind of a rough night.
Yeah, I can't imagine where Andre the Giant versus King Kong Bundy. It seems like it's one of those where, because Vince loves big guys, and he loves monster mashes, in the ring. Where on paper it looks awesome, but you have Andre the Giant, who's not light on his feet, and King Kong Bundy, who's not exactly a cruiserweight, and so you essentially have two giant trains colliding into each other at slow speed. I can't imagine these were, after about a minute, interesting matches.
Very, very little going on. A lot of, very slow-paced selling where, they hit the ropes and Andre gets his foot up and kicks Bundy, in the sternum, even though it's supposed to be his head. But Andre's hurting, so he can't get his foot up that high. And Bundy has to kind of waddle backwards into the ropes and fall out of the ropes and make the spot last for a couple minutes. Bobby Heenan has to rush over and kind of entice the audience while Captain Lou rallies them for Andre. Not the prettiest encounter. I think it drew okay, but I think they only really build it up the one time before they started incorporating it into tag team matches. On the I think it's the second Saturday night's main event, actually, you had Stud and Bundy, a Big John Stud team with Bundy against Hulk and Andre. So you put Hulk in there kind of as your tour de force to do the work. And then they would do Hillbilly Jim and Andre against Stud and Bundy, where Hillbilly Jim is doing most of the work. Always kind of ways to try to mask it, but keep the attraction of giant versus giant, so to speak. Because it's essentially, the Bundy character was a bully, and at a certain point you want to put him in with somebody who can give him his bully comeuppance, and, who better than Andre?
Sure. Fast forwarding here, late '85. This is where we're going to start building towards Bundy and Hogan at WrestleMania 2, which I believe their main event was the Los Angeles one, right? Chicago was the Battle Royal.
Right.
T and Piper was the boxing match in Nassau Coliseum.
Yes.
So that leaves, the cage match for Los Angeles. What an odd event that was. But so Bundy began targeting Hogan in late '85. They had one televised match at the Boston Garden, several house shows. Hogan wins them all, either by pinfall or disqualification. However, Saturday night's main event, 5. This is big. Bundy got his real push against Hogan. Hogan was wrestling the Magnificent Morocco when Bundy ran to ambush Hogan. With Morocco's help, Bundy repeatedly gave Hogan avalanches and big splashes, which caused Hogan to have severely bruised ribs in kayfabe. Bundy demanded a match and claimed Hogan was afraid of him, setting up their feud. Hogan demanded revenge and agreed to a steel cage match at the aforementioned WrestleMania 2. So I remember this as a kid. This is where my vivid memories of Bundy come in. And I'm actually, before I even get into that, I'm just curious, with your knowledge of wrestling history, do you know why? What were some of the backstage machinations that of all the people they had for on their roster to set up a WrestleMania 2 main event, why they went with Bundy?
There's two main reasons. One was that the initial thought for that event was that Hulk's opponent would be Randy Savage. What they thought was there was more money to be made down the line with that, rather than immediately in his first year having Randy go into that and have to, do that, and then you lose that value of it later on. Almost like I can cash out the game now and win, $200, but if I leave the bet in, I can win $1,000 if it pays off.
Right.
Which obviously it would later at WrestleMania 5 and one of the best developed angles they ever did. The other part of it was Hulk liked working with Bundy. Hulk Hogan loved to work with monsters. He loved to be the Dragon Slayer because he knew what he could do and how he could work the match, and he loved it because it was an easy match. Bundy was good to work with, never hurt him, and felt that there was money to be drawn with Bundy, which to a certain point there was. And I think it was a really well done angle. Like you said, that's one of your first real vivid memories, is Bundy just repeatedly giving those avalanches while Morocco is holding Hogan from the other side of the ring post. And then he's jumping up for the splash, and Morocco's like pushing him down to add leverage. And Bundy was believable because he really was a 400-plus pound guy who talked the good game and had been made to look like a real deal big threat, where the only guy you'd ever really seen got the better of Bundy at this point was Andre.
And Bundy, I think, was the crown jewel in Heenan's stable, I think, at this point, until Andre comes along and turns heel. I want to say that Bundy, maybe Big John Studd, are like the two biggest heavy hitters he's got in the stable, correct?
Oh, yeah, and at this point, Studd had already had runs with Hogan around the loop, because he had been Hulk's kind of first real regular challenger for the championship when Hulk won it. It was initially supposed to be Jesse Ventura, but Jesse developed the blood clots in his lungs, and so they put John Studd with Bobby Heenan, and John Studd got that role. And because he had already had the run with Hogan in most of the markets they ran, including Los Angeles, they weren't going to go with that again. So Bundy really was your best option.
It's funny, I think about Vince McMahon and his love for, and we want to focus on Bundy here, but I just think of, what would WrestleMania 2 have been like had it been, one of the body guys. I know he'd already had his run with Orndorff. I think by this point,
thinking maybe like a Hercules or somebody like that?
I was thinking actually Don Morocco.
Hey, Morocco, it's, I forget who posted it on Instagram and one of the pages I follow, but they had a thing where it was like, do you remember anybody with a more drastic body transformation than Don Morocco? Because Morocco at this point he's a bulky guy, almost more built like a strong man. Mm-hmm. And then you look at Morocco 87, 88, and he's just ripped to shreds.
And I can't remember if Dino Bravo was around this time, or if he doesn't come a little bit later.
Dino's here, but he's not in a real role yet because he's still working Montreal and still promoting Montreal.
Okay.
But he actually, here's the thing with that. They booked a house show in Montreal at one point. Hogan versus Dino Bravo. They canceled it because they did not want negative reaction to Hulk. And Bravo, no matter how much of a heel you played him as on TV, was not going to get booed in Montreal.
Dino Bravo, the Bret Hart of his time. All right, moving on. So Bundy, yeah. So I remember. Let's talk about that Saturday night's main event. I remember as a kid because I grew up right there in the rock and wrestling connection. I remember all of that, and I remember, years later, when the Ultimate Warrior comes, and that's really who I was like, okay, if you were ever to design the perfect wrestler, a perfect looking wrestler, it would be the Ultimate Warrior. But until then, I didn't hate Hulk Hogan. I just he just seemed a little too vanilla to me. I was not a Hulkamaniac. And his shtick about, say your prayers, and look, I was a cynical kid even when I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. However, he gained my sympathy, Pat Mullin. He gained my sympathy when, and of course this was the intention, when Bundy gave him those splashes. And I remember, as far as doing something, years later, Diamond Dallas Page, kind of the same thing. Where you're just like, how could you even be in the ring? Your ribs have been turned to ash from these previous beatings. You're wearing so much tape. How could you possibly get out of that match alive? And so, it turned cynical child Mark into at least a moderate fan of Hulk Hogan, saying, "Yeah, I want you to beat the big monster after what he did to your ribs."
Do you remember the vignettes of Hulk trying to train with the taped up ribs where he's doing chin-ups and
oh yeah,
Billy Jim's there to try to make sure he doesn't hurt himself while he's doing them?
Oh yeah, they used to play those on Superstars, 12 o'clock on Saturday morning on Channel 5 in New York.
Right.
What'd you think of the match? Now, the match itself, the big blue cage, they call it the Jungle Gym. It's a lot of Hulk Hogan kind of ramming King Kong Bundy into the cage, and King Kong Bundy ramming Hulk Hogan into the cage. From what I remember, neither one of them were technical masterpieces, and they certainly don't do much jumping off the cage. But I think it could be described as a brutal affair, not necessarily a 4-star match. What do you recall?
One I recall Elvira on commentary.
I remember Elvira.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I remember Elvira on commentary. I remember Bundy getting juice, which didn't happen a lot at this time. And the visual with Bundy's bald head, where no matter what, the blood was just showing, that was kind of exciting to me as a kid. I don't know what that says about young me, but I got hyped up when I saw the blood flow. But I remember it, and it's one of those things where when I watch it now, I kind of cringe a lot, not in a bad way, but more in a way of, oh man, that looked uncomfortable, that looked like it hurt. Oh man, that looked uncomfortable, that looked like it hurt. Every time I see these guys hitting that blue cage, because that blue cage, as we would find out years later, is really solid and does not give a lot and really hurts to be rammed into. And they do a lot of that. But I think there's a good build in that match to the spot where Hulk eventually gets the slam in. Because, we haven't seen Hulk slam Andre yet. So there's still that kind of can he do it type of thing, especially with bad ribs that had, hindered him throughout the match. And we see Bundy rip the tape off and beat him up and hit him with the avalanche and splash him. And eventually when Hulk does build to the slam and gets it, it's very solid storytelling. It's not an athletic classic. It's not a technical masterpiece, but it's got very good psychology to it. And I think I think if you're going to knock Hogan, you can't ever knock the psychology in his prime years of his matches, because he always had a story in the match.
To this day, I'll say one of my favorite matches of all time, it's in my top 10, is Hogan Savage at WrestleMania 5. And surprisingly, watching it years later and really digesting it, it's because you're used to seeing Hogan with, guys who can't work like technical matches, the Bundys and the Andre the Giants of the world. And then he gets in there with Savage, and he's going hold for hold with him. Like, it shocked the hell out of me.
Yeah, it's not to get off topic, but I would put that WrestleMania main event up against pretty much any WrestleMania main event. So,
two things after WrestleMania 2. Obviously, we have WrestleMania 3, the aforementioned six-man tag, where, the three things Bundy should be known for: squashing S.D. Jones, the main event at WrestleMania 2, and then squashing a midget. Ah, yes.
Fantastic.
Drops the avalanche on, who was it? Little Beaver?
Little Beaver got an avalanche and an elbow drop.
And of course, that was Hillbilly Jim's team, and they lost at WrestleMania. And that's pretty much, I think, everything goes downhill after that. According to the wiki, Bundy and Stud form a tag team, not a winning tag team. They get one shot at the British Bulldogs, which they lose. And then he's out of the WWF, as near as I can tell.
And well, he lasted a little bit longer. John Studd was pretty much gone right after those matches with the Bulldogs. And Bundy stuck around for a little bit. Bundy stuck around kind of till like right before WrestleMania 4. But he was really not involved in anything big after Survivor Series of 1987. He kind of just was getting phased out. He had another match with Hogan on Saturday night's main event that he got to win due to Andre Ference, we'll call it. He got a count-out win over Hogan. And I just always remember the pre-match promos they used to do on Saturday Night Live. He was the first one to have like a competing Mania. He kept talking about how Bundy Mania was going to take over. And I just love that. I can rewatch that and just enjoy the hell out of it because it was so great.
So Bundy had some house show matches, losing to Bam Bam Bigelow. Have you ever seen... Now, Bam Bam can move for a big guy. Bam Bam's like doing cartwheels and shit and moonsaults. Have you ever seen any of the Bam Bam Bundy matches?
I did, and I'll tell you a funny story. So I saw some of the Bam Bam Bundy stuff from like early 88, late 87. And Bam Bam's, like you said, he's doing the cartwheels. 9 times out of 10, Bam Bam is getting the win with the slingshot splash over the top rope, which is it's still an impressive visual to this day to see. And Bam Bam was even heavier then. So to see him at almost 400 pounds slingshotting over the top rope from the apron into the ring with a splash is just amazing. The first wrestling event that I went to by the WWF that was not at Madison Square Garden was at a high school in New Jersey in 1995. The main event of that match in July of 1995, the main event of that card, was in fact Bam Bam Bigelow versus King Kong Bundy.
Wow.
So that's like the first non-Madison Square Garden WWF show I ever went to. I sat in the front row, and I of the high school I eventually spent a couple of years in, and I watched Bam Bam Bigelow and King Kong Bundy in the main event.
So it says here his last official WWF run was a televised match at the MSG in '88, teaming up with the one-man gang who would go on to become Akeem, the African Dream, one of my favorites, by the way. In a loss, of course, to Don the Rock Morocco and my actual favorite, the Ultimate Warrior. So, 88 to 84, he's doing independent. He comes back in the...
Not really. Very little.
Okay.
At that time, he was really trying to do the acting thing.
So let's talk about that. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do it now or wait till we were done with his wrestling run. This is as good a time as any. Of course, the two things that I remember him was his role in Moving with Richard Pryor, where he plays Gorgo, and he's one of the movers, which was pretty funny. We talked about that today offline, and I actually kind of went back and looked through some of the stills in the movie. He doesn't have a huge part, but what little he does made me laugh pretty hysterically. And of course, he had a couple of guest spots on Married with Children. Which, talk about those for me. What do you remember on him in Married with Children?
So he had, when the show first aired, he got on, I think it was the first season of it, largely because the two creators of the show, Ron Leavitt and Michael G. Moy, were huge wrestling fans, and the name of the family, Bundy, is taken from King Kong Bundy. And their next-door neighbors, who were the Rhodes, their name was taken from Dusty Rhodes. So, cool little bit of trivia there. It wasn't a coincidence that Bundy wound up on the show. They were fans. And so they had Bundy play Uncle Irwin, who was one of Peggy's hick cousins from Wanker County, that Al couldn't stand, these, inbred backwoods insane nuts. And I don't remember that episode all that well, the first one he did, because it almost never aired in syndication for whatever reason. They really rarely ever showed it, but I always remember the part where he busts his head through the front door. The episode I remember more of, because they used to play it a lot, is years later when he was having his second WWF run. Bud, the son, is trying to join Al's all-man group, No Man, and his initiation task is to go to the wrestling matches and get a picture with King Kong Bundy, who all the guys idolize. So he dresses up as the Bumblebee and has a match with King Kong Bundy, who basically destroys him. And that's Bundy playing himself in the show. But I remember that one more than I do his original appearance as Uncle Irwin.
Going back to Moving for just 1 second. Moving. Now, most of what I remember about that is not the Bundy stuff. Richard Pryor, of course, is really funny, and he does bits like, he says "fuck you," and then he gives the person the wrong finger, and then he laments in the next scene that he gave him the wrong finger. He's got the one daughter that doesn't want to move, so she keeps sabotaging the house. And some really funny scenes. So there's all of that. And then, of course, at the end, Richard Pryor is got face paint on, he's decked out in black, and he's screaming down the road, "Give me back my shit." Good stuff. If you haven't seen Moving, go on Daily Motion and go check out the pair of videos that are up. It's good stuff. Apparently, he was also on an episode of Weird Science. Fancy that. And Boy Meets World.
He was not in Boy Meets World. I could tell you that. Unless there's the episode with the Sweet 16, and maybe he's seen in passing. He was never on Boy Meets World, other than maybe. And no, he wouldn't have even been in that. So no, he was not in Boy Meets World. I can guarantee that.
Okay.
But he was in Weird Science, because that was a USA Network show that they were trying to cross promote with Raw, and one of the writers of the Weird Science TV show, unfortunately, is a guy named Ed Ferrara, who would, of course, go on to infamy later on with his writing partner, Vince Russo. But Bundy was on Weird Science playing himself.
Do you know anything about his stand-up career? Have you ever seen it or heard anything about it?
Yes. So he used to do a lot of clubs here in Jersey. I guess he didn't want to really travel to do it. He kind of wanted to. He was never doing a huge set of like a 40-minute set. He would kind of go up to 15, 20 minutes, and that kind of just end it and kind of feel out the crowd. Some of it was almost like what the guys are doing now, like Jake Roberts and Rob Van Dam, where they're doing kind of spoken word performances and telling stories. He did a little bit of that, but he really just wanted to be a stand-up and tell jokes. And I saw clips of him at a club here in Jersey called the Stress Factory. That's very well known for comics. He played there a handful of times, a lot of smaller venues here. I think it was something he was enjoying and kind of wanted to perfect, but I don't think it really ever was going to click to go further than what it was.
Do you know any of his bits or what he would talk about?
Whenever he would tell a story, he liked to talk about how he thought Randy Savage was an asshole. And if you ask him why, he said, honestly, I really don't have a good reason. I just didn't like him.
Terrific. It's always good to go with good strong material there. All right. Back to 1994, the $1 Million Corporation. I hated this. Oh my God! In 1994, I was a senior in high school. In '95, I was in college, and I was kind of in and out of watching wrestling at this time. I mean, I feel like probably around WrestleMania 8 or 9, I kind of drifted out, and then was drifting in a little bit, kind of dipping my toe in around this time, but I had other stuff going on, so I didn't watch too much of it. But I remember seeing him in the $1 Million Corporation and going, what is this pile of garbage? Pat, what is this pile of garbage?
Can I tell you one thing that, like, as a kid I could never figure out, and then I figured it out years later?
Go ahead.
So, now I remember, the glory years of Bundy, and then they aired these funny promos of his comeback where, like, you see, like, a cityscape trembling, and then you see Bundy, like, ripping the top off of a building and stuff like that. King Kong Bundy's coming back. And, like, he came back, and he's still a big guy and wearing the singlet and the whole deal, but he looked different. And I could never figure out as a kid why he looked different to me. Till years later I figured out, when he had his first run in the WWF, he was shaving his eyebrows off. And I don't know why it's something I never picked up on, but he looked different when he came back because he wasn't shaving his eyebrows off. He had eyebrows. And I don't know why I could never just immediately put that together. I'm just an idiot sometimes, I guess. But it's one of those realizations you have, like, years later. Like, I think it was when I first got, like, before you had the WWE Network, you had WWE 24/7 you could subscribe to through your cable. And, like, they would add, certain shows, whatever. So I think they had, like, one of the Monday Night Raws on from '94. And it was, like, him and Mabel were having a match. And I'm watching it, and I look at Bundy, and I'm like, okay. And then it just coincidence, I think they happened to have, like, an old primetime on that he was on. And that's when I put it together. I was like, man, he doesn't have any eyebrows. So that's what it was.
So do you have any idea what possessed them to put him in the $1 Million Corporation? I mean, I know that there was this long streak of, we have to match up The Undertaker with another big giant, either a fat guy or a tall guy. Either way, he has to, he would. I tell you what I know we've talked in our wrestling group, our chat group, about how The Undertaker has had one garbage match after another, and, he is kind of held up by some of the guys. When he got in there with a worker, the matches were, obviously a lot better, but he could not carry some of these matches where, the guys was just terrible. But I remember in the late 90s where this is where his first feud with champion Steve Austin. And he comes out on Raw and he's talking about, for years I was the Dragon Slayer. This is the shit he's talking about right here. This is King Kong Bundy and Mabel and Giant Gonzalez. Ugh. Ugh. I wonder if he has nightmares, where he's in a triple threat match with Giant Gonzalez and Khali.
Mark, I have nightmares about that. I'm sure he does too.
So, I mean, I'm sure the obvious answer to my question is they stuck Bundy in the corporation because that's what, because they were kind of doing the Hulk Hogan thing of, here we'll have The Undertaker go through this entire roster, this entire stable of guys, and, of course, the big boss will be, this monster this monster King Kong Bundy. But do you have any other insight as to what possessed them to put him in the corporation?
Well, it was one of those things where, one, they wanted heels who they felt could be strong drawing cards against their top baby faces. So you look at who the top baby faces were, 94 or 95. You have Brett, you have Diesel, you have The Undertaker. and those are your big three at that time. Eventually, you get Shawn Michaels. Luger was being pushed down the card at this point in time.
Sid.
So, well, Sid's not a babyface. Sid eventually comes in as a heel. But, same principle involved where you want a monster to put your babyface up against and try to create that sense of, oh, boy, I might have to pay to see this one. I don't know how this is going to turn out. And because Bundy had a good track record in the past, Bundy wasn't a guy who was out there visibly somewhere else for years. They felt like he would be a good fit to come in. The thing with Bundy being a part of the corporation, Vince's thing at the time, up until, really the Attitude Era was, got to have a manager, pal. Because he felt that guys needed that extra heat. And he felt like that's where Bundy could be used most effectively. I do think a character like Bundy benefits from a manager because you have him as this destructive force of nature type deal, and you have this evil mastermind kind of pointing him in that direction. I've always said, booking wrestling in its very simplest form is like writing a comic book. And, you always have an evil mastermind putting the heavy hitter out there against the hero. So you don't, Magneto doesn't immediately go toe-to-toe with the X-Men. He sends Juggernaut to do that first. That's what you're doing with Bundy.
So, the highlight of this run was his WrestleMania 11 match. WrestleMania 11. Worst WrestleMania in the history of the company?
Boy, it's I would say top 3 worst very easily.
9 is definitely in there. What do you think the third one is?
9's in the mix. Last year really wasn't very good.
Last year in New Orleans, Gosh,
because even those older WrestleManias that went on forever, like WrestleMania 4 with the tournament, at least you have those things you can pull apart, like it's Savage's crowning moment.
Right.
So you should watch it for that. And the tag title match with Strikeforce and Demolition, you can point to that and say, that was a good match. I like that. 5, you got Hogan Savage, which was outstanding, and Rude Warrior, which was outstanding in its own way. And I don't say that backhandedly. I think that was actually a really good match considering who was involved.
6 is Hogan Warrior.
Yeah, 6, you got Hogan Warrior. You got Jake DiBiase on it. There's good stuff there. 7's loaded with good stuff if you actually go back and look at it.
Right.
8, you got, Brett Piper, which is an outstanding match, unbelievable match.
You have Flair and Savage, and you have...
Yeah, but that wasn't good, so...
What do you mean that wasn't good?
That was not good.
If I remember... Well, look, maybe it wasn't good. Maybe the match itself wasn't good, but nobody cared about the match. All anyone cared about was when Elizabeth came back in, and they were reunited, and the whole world cried.
That was WrestleMania 7.
Was that WrestleMania 7? Oh, shit, yeah. That's right. That's what I'm thinking of.
Elizabeth does make an appearance, but not the same way. Nobody cares about Savage versus Flair. That stunk, and I'm not blaming Randy. WrestleMania 9, the wheels definitely come off.
Yeah.
WrestleMania 10's a great show.
Yep.
WrestleMania 11, the wheels come off again.
I don't think the wheels so much come off is that it's just the whole thing is it's like the Monty Python bit with the castle built in the swamp. I built a castle in the swamp and it sunk. And I built another castle and it sunk too. The third one burned down and the fourth one stayed up. By the time they get to WrestleMania 11, we're halfway between sinking and burning down.
You look at that show and you're like, when Brett and Shawn can't even give me good matches on the night, like, you're in trouble.
Well, 95, that was the year where they threw Diesel the title and said, here, you big lug, carry the company. And, I think 95 is like their worst year in like the history of the company. And then 96 is a little bit better, and then 97 is much better, and 98 was Austin. So, they were off to the races then.
But it continued a strong string, at least, of WrestleManias where even if maybe necessarily the show as a whole is not good, there's always 1 or 2 matches you can cherry pick and be like, it wasn't a great, but that was great. But,
right.
Last couple of years haven't been particularly great either. And I would think, I'll go with last year as probably my bottom. I would have to rewatch the last 3 years more than likely, but one of them is definitely going to be my bottom three, along with 11 and 9. And unfortunately, the worst match of 11 may have been Undertaker and Bundy.
Yeah. Just as an aside, I think of the modern era, my favorite WrestleMania was WrestleMania 30, and that's just because of the Daniel Bryan story. You know, he's starting off with Triple H, beating him, going into the main event injured and taking out Randy Orton and Batista, becoming the champion. It's a shame it meant nothing shortly after, but the actual event itself and his crowning moment is a lasting memory that I still hold on to. The other one, slightly less dramatic, but was so much fun. And I remember that night, I was just because of who was in the match, I was so excited when Seth Rollins cashes in the Money in the Bank on Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. It's hysterical to me. Anyway, all right, let's get back to Bundy. So yeah,
he's mired in the 1995 WWF.
Yeah, not a lot here. His crowning moment again is being defeated by the Undertaker in a shit match on a shit card.
He himself said he in hindsight, he looked back on it and he was like, I should have immediately instead gone to WCW.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting play because I think he immediately fits into the Dungeon of Doom.
Sure.
And, you'll see him wrestle Hogan again. And I'm sure the newsletters and the sheets will bitch the way they did anyway, because it's trying to recreate, Hulkamania as it was with him versus all these, guys he wrestled in the WWF, like, John Tenta and Kamala.
But can you just imagine King Kong Bundy in the New World Order? Just standing there with all those guys, big-ass leather jacket and jeans on, New World Order T-shirt. Because that's what would have happened.
I think they should have just put New World Order on the back of his singlet and just have Bundy squash and call it the Bundy World Order.
All right. Last thoughts here on Mr. King Kong Bundy. He's part of my childhood. I was sad that, at 61, that's scary. I'm 43, and we already know about my health issues. This guy had some diabetes issues. They don't know what the cause of death is yet, but 61 in 2019 is a way younger age to go. And it's a reminder that, wrestlers of that era led hard lives that were hard on their bodies. And a lot of them are unfortunately dropping before they really should, and it's sad. It's sort of the underlying sadness of all of this, of all this greatness, of all this funness, that goes along with being these icons of pro wrestling, and then you have this sort of sad ending. But I'm gonna excuse me. Speaking of health issues, I'm gonna give you the last word here on Mr. Bundy, and then we're gonna go home.
So we talked a lot about Bundy, the character and the actor. I'm going to tell you about a good Bundy story. So I have a friend who referees a lot of local indie shows here in Jersey. He works for Game Changer and Pro Wrestling Syndicate, et cetera, et cetera. He also does a lot of work with the Valerie Fund, which if you don't know what the Valerie Fund is, it's a charity that does a lot of work with cancer patients. He's done a lot of fundraising for them, and it really means a lot to him because he's a cancer survivor from a young age. He met Hulk Hogan. He was a Make-A-Wish kid, and he wound up beating leukemia. And his dream has always been to be involved in wrestling, and that was his motivation. So last year, Bundy did an appearance at one of the shows my friend was reffing, and got to sit down and talk to him for a little while. And one of the things guys do when they're either working these independent shows or just making appearances. Well, one of the ways they make their money is they quote unquote sell gimmicks. They sell autographed 8x10s, pictures, whatever. So Bundy, for whatever reason, is just sitting there talking to my buddy Ryan, and Ryan tells him like, yeah, He was like, wrestling, I know it's cliche, but it saved my life. And Bundy goes, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, when I was young and I had leukemia, and the only kind of fun I had was watching guys like you on TV every Saturday morning. And I wanted to be involved in this since that, and that was always the thing I hung on to. And wrestling really saved my life. And so Bundy pulls out a stack of like 58 by 10s because Ryan tells him about this work that he does with the Valerie Fund. Bundy goes ahead and just starts signing all these 8 by 10s and gives them to Ryan. And he goes, see what you get for these, give all the money to the Valerie Fund.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
Just without hesitation, just pulls out, all these 8 by 10s that he pays to have made up, and just signs off every one of them, hands them to Ryan, says, here, see what you can get for these, give the money to the Valerie Fund, without thinking about it.
Good for Bundy. I mean, he seems like he was a good dude. Like, I've never really heard of any, like, Bundy garbage stories, where he
Except if you're the Honky Tonk Man.
Well, Hall of Fame Honky Tonk Man.
Want me to do that one real quick?
Sure.
I like the Honky Tonk Man, but, you travel with him, and you go into Wendy's, whatever, get some food, and then he'll pull out his cell phone and start talking. Yeah, I'm wrestling over at the county fairgrounds tonight, but I don't want to get mobbed. Yeah, we're doing a show there over about 7. And so Bundy proceeds to tell the story about how Honky Tonk Man doesn't want to go in there because he doesn't want to get mobbed. But then he'll proceed to loudly say, yeah, we're wrestling over at, the fairgrounds or the municipal auditorium or whatever, and, hoping somebody comes up and wants a gimmick to buy or whatever. And then talks about how Honky Tonk Man doesn't tip. He talks about, and then this leads to one of my favorite Honky Tonk Man stories, where the guy, it's a U-shoot, and one of the fans says to him, hey, King Kong Bundy tells a story that you're like Mr. Pink in Reservoir Dogs. You don't believe in tipping. So Honky Tonk, why don't you go ask that fat piece of shit Bundy? I don't recall him ever reaching in his pocket for a tip. What am I supposed to do? Give some idiot $5 or $10 so he fucks up my food and can't bring it to me the way I want it, and then I can't get my little daughter the kind of shoes she wants. Or I can't buy her little Barbie dolls because I give this idiot $5 or $10 every time he fucks up my food.
Okay then.
Gotta love Wayne.
Yeah.
I can't not, much like Luke Gallows, I can't not put him over because he's the most self-loathing, like, I'm aware of what I do and I hate it person ever, and I enjoy all of it.
I cannot wait for his Hall of Fame speech. Like, I know that...
Inducted by Jerry the King Lawler, as I call him, Chester the Molester.
They're not going to hand him, like, a hot mic and just say, go crazy, and, the WWE is such, like, a fascist-controlled environment, but there's still... Like, you still get these nuggets of personality out of some of these old-timers. I'll never forget Jake's, where he's just cracking the audience up. He's having a grand old time, takes a breath and goes, all my friends are dead. You're like, just suck the air right out of the room. Guy lived for moments like that.
I mean, Honky was there to induct Coco, but I think he reined it in because he's actually friends with Coco. Coco's one of, like, the 4 people he doesn't talk negatively about. So he probably was like, you know what, I'll make this about Coco. I'll be a good guy. But now that it's about him, the thing that sucks about that, though, too, is they're doing the Hall of Fame. It's at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. But with WrestleMania being in Jersey, Bundy is an actual Jersey guy. Was from Atlantic City, lived down in Gloucester County, which is way in the southwest corner of Jersey, really close to Pennsylvania. Actually, he passed away in a town called Glassboro, which is where Rowan College is. And the town is actually named after the glass industry that was started there. But
we need a table of 3 with I can't think of the third person. I'm going to let you name the third guy. But we need a table of 3 of Honky Tonk Man, Jerry Lawler, and...
Oh, Jim Cornette. Come on.
Yes. And just call it Memphis.
I'd call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll let you sort out what's what, but no, Bundy. I think Bundy would have been such a great Hall of Fame induction this year, being the locality
He's not in the Hall of Fame?
King Kong Bundy is not a Hall of Famer.
Oh, Jesus Christ. For whatever intern at the WWE is listening to this, correct this problem now. Contact his people before it's too late and get him in this year. What a travesty that is.
Because the thing is, too, like, Bundy's one of those guys who entered the public consciousness outside of wrestling. And he didn't do it with a whole lot of promotion behind him the same way a lot of other guys did. You know, I mean...
Not for nothing, but the whole 85 roster, if they're not in there, should be. I mean... When you think about every single one of those guys pulled their weight and got that company over, it wasn't just a one-man show. I mean, they like to think it's like, oh, Hulk Hogan, you know, but Hulk Hogan had to have guys to work with, and he had to have other people on the card. And and like I said, I remember King Kong Bundy from the cartoon, and again, he was the headliner at WrestleMania. I mean, I thought he was already in. What an oversight.
What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to look at the card for WrestleMania 1. And I'm going to see how many guys are in and how many guys aren't in. Okay? So, Hogan's in. Mr. T's in as a celebrity. Snook is in their cornerman. Orndorff's in. Piper's in. Orton's in. Wendy Richter's in. Cyndi Lauper's in the celebrity wing. Leilani Kai is not in. Moolah is in. Andre's in, Stud is in, Bobby Heenan's in. Sheik is in, Volkov is in, Freddie Blassie's in, Lou Albano is in, Barry Windham is in as a horseman, Mike Rotundo is not in.
Okay, Mike Rotundo needs to be in.
As IRS or Mike Rotundo?
I mean, he'll go in as IRS, but the whole scope of his career, I think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Right. Junkyard Dog is in. Greg the Hammer Valentine's in. Jimmy Hart is in. Brutus Beefcake is going in this year.
Is he?
Yeah.
How'd you find that? All I've heard is Honk Tonk Man and the Broad.
The other two names they released, but they haven't officially formally announced, are Beefcake and Christian.
Okay.
So Beefcake, we'll call him in. Luscious Johnny Valiant, his manager, is in. David Sammartino is not, nor will ever be in.
No, that's fine. His father's good enough.
Bruno's in.
As
Ricky Steamboat is in. Matt Bourne is not in.
Okay, Doink the Clown needs to be in.
Bundy is not in. S.D. Jones is not in. Tito Santana is in. The Executioner, better known as Playboy Buddy Rose, is not in. You look at those names and you see that Bundy's not in. That's pretty conspicuous.
Yeah, that's a crying shame right there. Let's do this exercise with two real quick. Okay.
Okay. I'll pull it up. So, WrestleMania 2, you've got Hogan in, Bundy not in, Bobby Heenan in, Haas and Terry Funk are in, Jimmy Hart is in, JYD and Tito are in, Adrian Adonis not in, Uncle Elmer not in, Ricky Steamboat in, Hercules Hernandez not in.
Should be in.
If I had my way, Katie Fernandez, if you're listening, we already talked about this. That's his daughter, by the way.
I got that.
The British Bulldogs are not in.
Should be in.
Lou Albano is in. Ozzy Osbourne is not in. I'm pretty sure. Beefcake will get inducted. Valentine is in. Johnny Valiant is in. The Battle Royal, we can go through some of the names that are in there, but Andre, of course, is in. Bret Hart in. Neidhart is not in, but rumored to be the Hart Foundation this year. Other names in that Battle Royal included John Studd, Bruno, the Iron Sheik, and they're all in. Refrigerator Perry is in the celebrity wing. So you have those guys in. Moolah is in. Velvet McIntyre, not in. Corporal Kirchner, not in. Volkov in, Freddie Blassie in.
You know, as much as Corporal Kirshner was one of my favorites because he was a guy wearing army fatigues, and that's all that I cared about. And again, Sergeant Slaughter not around at this time, so Corporal Kirshner was like always the guy that, like, among my toys, always had the belt. I'm okay with him though not being in the Hall of Fame.
Mark, you would actually really like him in Japan because he worked under the name and gimmick of Leatherface.
Perfect.
Okay, so now we go to Long Island, and Mr. T in the celebrity wing. His cornerman, the Haiti Kid, and Smokin' Joe Frazier not in. Roddy Piper in. Bob Orton in. Lou Duva not in. Jake the Snake is in. George Wells is not. Randy Savage in. George Steele in. Miss Elizabeth not in. That's one that should be rectified soon.
Yeah, they need to fix that right quick.
Don Morocco in. Fuji in. Paul Orndorff in.
Okay.
So of the names there, probably the Bulldogs most conspicuous.
Yeah. WWE, fix it. There's no reason to leave King Kong Bundy out of the Hall of Fame.
And Georgia Smith, we're fighting for Davey.
Yeah, let's get the Bulldogs in this. Well, I mean, if the Hart Foundation's all going in this year, I got to imagine Davey goes in with the Hart Foundation.
No, it's not going to be the 5-man Hart Foundation. It's going to be the classic Brett Jim tag team.
Oh, that's horseshit. Oh,
I mean,
before the Bulldogs?
Well, they had a better run in the company.
Ugh.
I mean, realistically, they were 2-time champions. Bulldogs only once. The Hart Foundation themselves as a team lasted from 85 to 91.
Are they
Bulldogs were there from...
Are they waiting to do WrestleMania in London to get the Bulldogs in there? Is that the idea here?
That would be really cool if they did run like Wembley, and then you could induct, Davey and Dynamite there. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I've heard that they want to do, now that they've got the network and they can run shows at dark early in the morning. They don't have to worry about pay-per-view anymore. That they were talking about doing like they did with Saudi Arabia, where they did a Royal Rumble, doing like a WrestleMania specific to a region. So, if you're going to do Europe, first place you do it is London. You like say you do it at Wembley Stadium. And yeah, I mean, maybe somebody's had that, sort of, in their back pocket. They're like, hey, at some point we're going to do a London Mania, and we'll do a Hall of Fame, an all-British Hall of Fame, or all-European Hall of Fame. And that's when the Bulldogs go, the Bulldogs go in. Yeah,
but, I mean, they're the conspicuous ones. But WrestleMania 1, very clear to me that King Kong Bundy is the conspicuous absence, and I'm not going to, say guys like, Ricky Steamboat didn't have a distinguished career. And I think a lot of people aren't aware that before his, tag team run with the Sheik and, the Bolsheviks, Nikolai Volkov was main eventing Madison Square Garden against Bruno as a top heel. So he deserves that respect, and I think he is a deserving Hall of Famer. But if you're putting guys in there, and I'm going to catch a lot of shit for this, but if you're putting in Tito Santana, who I love, I think Tito's so undervalued in terms of history, in terms of what he brought to the table. But if you're going to put Tito in, who do you think 90% of the public consciousness is more aware of? Tito Santana or King Kong Bundy?
Well, here's a question, and I think this is as good a place to end as any. They also do that like Legacy Hall of Fame, which is, basically they just read off a list of people. They say, and these people are in the Hall of Fame too. And it's all guys that that are like from like the 40s and 50s and maybe even earlier than that.
It's really pre 70s whole like.
But I'm wondering if maybe they'll sneak him in there.
I doubt it. I really think they're going to reserve that for, your real pioneers, people who, and this is really terrible to say, but because most fans don't have a real appreciation of history. People whose speeches they really wouldn't care about and would probably fart at. Like Bruno's the exception to that because Bruno's Bruno. Like if you were to put, and I hate because this is a guy to me who should have been in, immediately. But if you were to do like an Ivan Koloff induction, I don't think anybody in the audience is going to care.
Right.
As much as they should, they won't. So I think Ivan Koloff is more your likelihood for legacy. I think for Bundy gets the induction proper. should he ever get it, which is the sad.
I don't know how quickly it takes to get to get a hold of these family members and saying, hey, we want to get so and so into the Hall of Fame. I don't know if it takes a year, 6 months, 3 months to get it all finalized, or if it can it be done, on the back of a matchbook quickly enough. I mean, we're talking, WrestleMania is a little under a month away. If he's going to go in, put him in New York, New Jersey. That's where he belongs. Don't wait till next year in fucking Tampa, because Tampa needs to be more Florida centered.
Yeah, I think this year the two guys who they should have put in, and really I'll put three because I'll say Ivan Koloff too as a legacy, but I think it should have been Bundy and Bam Bam.
For sure. Oh my God! Why isn't Bam Bam in the Hall? All right, you know what? That's good. We're gonna be here another hour talking about Hall of Fame misses. So,
well, you're talking two wrestlers who probably are the most, other than maybe Dallas Page, the most identifiable with being New Jersey. Like right. Bam Bam was the Beast from the East. His Greetings from Asbury Park. Bundy, the Atlantic City Avalanche. It was initially called. So I just think that it's a real missed opportunity if not only did both of them not go in this year, but neither of them go in, like not even at least one of them.
Well, hopefully, is Bam Bam still alive or did he pass away?
Bam Bam passed away 13 years ago.
Okay, well, I would have to think it's pretty easy enough to get a hold of his family. Maybe that's still to come.
It's a little bit, yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak too much into that, but that's not as easy as you think.
Alrighty. Let's leave that one alone. Alright, we hope you've enjoyed our discussion / coughing over the life and times of King Kong Bundy. As a personality, he will be missed. As a wrestler, he will be missed. And, it's fun to go down memory lane and talk about these things. A little sad, to know the guy passed at 61, as I said before. So with that said and repeated, let's go ahead and get out of here. Tomorrow night on the Metal Hammer of Doom, we're going to be reviewing the new Queensryche album. And then Andrew Graham is going to be here Thursday. Finally.
Smiling next to you.
Finally, we're going to be talking about The Crown. Next week, I'm actually taking a break from source material for a couple of weeks, so you'll hear me next week talking about the Captain Marvel Higher, Faster, Further. But then I'm taking 2 weeks off, and then I'll be back.
You're not allowed to talk about Captain Marvel, Mark. You're a white man.
Yeah, I know. I broke the rules. But I'll be back April 1st to be talking Plastic Man on the Lam. So that's that. In the meantime, we'll be reviewing the new Captain Marvel movie on Tuesday, March 12th. We'll be reviewing the new In Flames, I the Mask, on March 13th. And right before I go on my spring break cruise, Robert Winfrey is going to subject me to One Punch Man. When I come back, now listen up, Pat, because this is where we're going to need you here. On Tuesday, the 26th, Damn You Hollywood, we're going to look at a Netflix movie called The Dirt, which, of course, is the Motley Crue biopic. It'll be myself.
Yeah.
It'll be myself, Jesse Starcher, and Robert Winfrey. But the next night, Pat Mullin, make yourself available. Metal Hammer of Doom, Motley Crue's greatest hits.
Yeah. Totally 80s Pat, everybody. He's back.
That's right. And then on the 28th, we'll be doing an on trial for Scooby-Doo 2. Monsters Unleashed. And then
why is that on trial? That's a terrific film.
And then on Saturday, March 30th, on ESPN, myself and Pat will be doing yet another boxing commentary. Alexander something Polish versus Dowdow something African on ESPN. Saturday night, March 30th. You excited for that, Pat?
Believe it or not, yes. I think light heavyweight is a terrific division with a lot of talent, and I think Wozniak is really somebody to watch and enjoy. I don't know much about his challenger, but I know that the odds makers are giving him a live chance.
So we're all excited. I certainly enjoy doing the boxing commentary, so check that out. Pat, what do you got going on these days?
So you can hear me on a recent episode of Source Material along with Mark, our regular host Jesse Starcher, and our buddy Chris, where we review one of my least favorite comic storylines of all time, Emerald Twilight. You can go ahead and look at that and the descent into madness of Hal Jordan and my lifelong hatred of the current, at the time, DC editorial staff and Ron Mars for what they did to my childhood. You can hear that loud and clear and enjoy it for what it is. I get real rowdy in that, and I make some comments towards Brie Larson that she probably feels are because I'm a white man and thus I'm evil. One of those words was Shazam, which I'm looking forward to. But
yeah, that looks real fun.
For all our listeners out there, I'm in the works of trying to put together a new show where we look at the world's strongest man competition that has gone on since 1977. We're going to do some history, some watch-alongs, and talk about what went on and kind of what it's evolved into today. So for anyone interested, you can find me on the Facebook under my name, Patrick Mullin. You can find me through Mark if you're a friend of Mark's and you're interested. Talk to me, hit me up. We'll figure something out. Also, maybe more potential for some watch-alongs. There's a lot of stuff up on the WWE Network that Mark and I have watched and enjoyed, and maybe we'll do a watch-along on some of those. So just keep your eyes out.
Yep, lots and lots of content coming your way in 2019 here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network that I'm going to cough my way through. Hopefully not. All right. Thank you once again, Pat, for joining us as our walk along memory lane in the life of King Kong Bundy. Be well, be safe, and behave.